Hi there, everybody. Welcome to Courtroom Insider. I'm Nate Eaton. So glad you're here and hope you're having a good Tuesday. It is October 7th, 2025. And I'd love to know where you're watching from, by the way. And if you have any questions, I do go through and I read where you're watching from, and it blows me away sometimes. I want to put a big map like right here, and we can put dots where everybody's at. It'd be cool if we could do that live, like when you log on, have a little dot being up and we can see where everybody's watching. Anyway, I hope you're watching us from near or far. I'm just glad that you're here. And tonight, I think you'll be interested by what we're going to talk about. I got an email about a week ago from someone asking if I'd be interested in speaking with a former FBI investigator who has written a book about the largest exhumation of murder victims in FBI history. Yeah, that caught my eye. I said, absolutely, I'd love to. Her name is Catherine Schweit. And she, as I mentioned, is a retired FBI agent who spent 5, 6, 7 years, something like that, leading the force with the FBI on mass shootings. So we talked about that, but let me read you a little bit about this book. It's called Women Who Talk to the Dead. The true story of the FBI's largest exhumation of murder victims, an unprecedented mission to bring justice to 200 families. Women Who Talk to the Dead follows Detroit Police Detective Shannon Jones and FBI Special Agent Leslie Larson as they lead Operation United, the most ambitious effort ever to identify nameless murder victims. Against skepticism and bureaucracy, these women built a team of forensic anthropologists, scientists, and investigators to unearth Detroit's hidden past. Through rain-soaked cemetery digs, crumbling case files, and bone-filled body bags, they sought to bring closure to families who have waited decades to know the truth. Their mission: restore the identities of lives once stolen and forgotten, and close 200 unsolved murders. It's an amazing effort that's still in process. It's not done. These women decided they were going to go and find the bodies of these 200 victims, DNA test them, and try to find their families and close the cases. Imagine the coordination, the money, the effort, the time, all of that to make it happen. And they're doing it. And tonight, Catherine Schweit is here to talk about the effort. She's written this book. Also, we talk about mass shootings, in particular, the one at the LDS Church, the Latter-day Saint Church in Michigan, because Detroit, which this book is based on, just down the road from where that shooting happened, and the mental health and what maybe can be done to at least reduce the number of these shootings. We talk about it all. It's a fascinating conversation. Please welcome Catherine Schweit. What gave you the idea to write this book?
I spent 20 years in the FBI as an agent. And when a long time ago, when I was working in the Milwaukee office, there was a young lady who the Milwaukee office hired right out of college, very green, but very excited to come into the bureau and, do the things that agents do in the FBI. So fast forward so many years, and through the years, she stayed with the bureau. And her career, she would always call me if she needed advice for something. And so I had mentored her along through the years. And one time, truthfully, kind of in my last couple of years at the bureau, she called me about some trouble that she was doing on some project. She didn't think she was going to get over this project. She didn't think they were going to be able to finish it. They couldn't get the funding for it. And could I help her, through the idea of how she could attack this trouble, tackling this, challenge.
Mm.
And it turns out this is Special Agent Leslie Larson, who now runs the Detroit forensics team, the third busiest FBI forensics team in the country.
Mm.
And she was telling me about how she was working with the Detroit Police Department to exhume 200 buried, unidentified murder victims. To which I said, "What?" And then it kind of moved from there forward. I said, "This is a story that has to be told. What you guys are doing is incredible."
Right. So are they all from Michigan? Do you know? Do they know?
They're still identifying them, but they have finished digging them all up. And that's essentially kind of the essence of how I capped the book. They spent 5 years and a lot of ups and downs trying to trying to exhume bodies from two cemeteries and then begin to identify the individuals, which requires the identification is kind of, there's multiple parts, right? When you open a grave up, you don't just get, you get the clothes they're in and something that might have been left behind. And because when somebody's buried, by the medical examiner's office in the county, they just take whatever possessions they have and
Hmm.
bury them with them. So they picked up kind of information. They're picking up information that way about who was out there. Images, for instance, of clothing that was worn that they can now show to somebody else. But the link that they really needed was who's this somebody else they can show them to. So in
Mm.
each case, the 200 people who they exhumed under court order, their goal was to obtain bones that they could get DNA from.
Mm.
And the DNA samples have been to the labs, but not all of them. They're still going to the labs. So this is actually a very live story because many DNA samples have come back and actually identified individuals, but many haven't even gotten to the lab. Many bones haven't even gotten to the labs yet because it costs money and it
Yeah.
takes time. And so it's coming a little bit at a time.
Wow. How far back do these murder victims go?
70 years.
So
70
fairly
years. Oh,
recent. I mean, we're not
yeah.
talking about, hundreds and hundreds of years ago.
I think that now bring the other player into it. The one whose idea this was is Detroit detective, now Master Sergeant Shannon Jones. And Shannon Jones is the only person in Detroit assigned to handle missing persons cases. And what really happened is, I think that this is Shannon is very dedicated to working these missing persons cases, and she began to see her missing person cases taking her back to their warehouse where there were unidentified murder victims that had open cold case murders. And
Mm.
she's looking at the files that they have. In fact, there are about 300 that date back 70 years, but 300 of them, of the 300, they don't have DNA for 200. And that's what her goal was for this project.
Talk about a ambitious goal because you have the 300 files and then you've got to find the 200 that you don't have DNA for. And I'm assuming are these all just named Jane and John Doe's?
Indeed, they are.
And then you got to track down their burial sites, exhume the
Yeah.
bodies, get the
Yes.
DNA, rebury them, and then follow up with all the DNA that's tested. Am I missing a step in there? I mean, it sounds like a complicated thing.
Yeah, I think it is so complicated. That's what I think was fun and fascinating about working on the book. I learned so much, as you know, always do when you write. Uh, it indeed there are many steps in between all those things. You
Mhm.
can only exhume bodies if you get a court order to do it, right? And when you go to dig up people, cemetery records say Jane is here and John is here and Bill is here and Sally's here, but underground it might not be that way.
Yeah. Why is she so passionate about doing this?
Shannon is a born and raised Detroit person. Her family is filled with law enforcement. She's very connected to her community, and she's married to a firefighter. It's really clear when you talk to her that she's very, I think, connected is the right word. She's emotionally connected to all these people who she feels, boy, not to put words in her mouth, but I've spent years with her now, and it seems that she feels so passionate about anybody who's marginalized in any way and left behind.
Mm.
And that it's so that there's no higher mission for her in law enforcement than to provide justice to people who can't speak for themselves. And I think that's the key with where she and Leslie connected.
Mm.
Um, Leslie said to me, when I go out to look for bones, when we get calls, she said, I can tell if somebody is buried underground. I can feel it. And I know that we have to speak for them because nobody else can.
Mm. So when they exhume the bodies and get the DNA testing back and they get a match, what happens from there?
So, as you can imagine, nothing in real life takes a long time. Although in television and movies, it's really quick. And I
Right.
think that's it. You read in a newspaper story. And I was talking to a friend of mine once who said, who's a writer, and he in the news world, and he said, I think I've written. I said, you know how it is, and you read that they exhumed the body and got the DNA, and that's that. It's all in one. It's part of one sentence. And he said, I think I've written that.
Right.
So I think that we think of that because we see it in television and movies, but that takes a long time.
Mhm.
DNA itself, it takes a number of days to get the testing done, but getting the bones just to the labs takes time. And then, so the first person that they identified was really a few years into the dig. That's when they first got real information back. And then it started to flow faster than that. And I'll give you, if I can give you an example of
Please.
somebody, um, because I don't want to, I don't want to give up what's in the book too much, right? But
Yeah.
let me give you a great example of something that happened after after I capped the book. Because at a certain point, I mean, I can't write the book and leave the book open until they resolve all
Right.
200 cases. But I thought I could write the book and resolve some of the cases and then tell people, there's more to come. And so here's one of the more to comes that came I after I finished the book, or after it went into print. Um, they were digging one of the early years they were digging. And I should say early years because they spent 5 summers doing these exhumations.
Mm.
So I would spend time out there with them because I wanted the readers to see and hear and feel and taste what it was like to be out in the cemeteries.
Yeah.
And so one of the people who they exhumed turned out was an unknown male. And the forensics work was done. They sent the DNA out. The DNA comes back, and it comes back to a positive identification of a man who was, who again, these are all homicide victims, right? A man who was murdered in Detroit, and so they do then they have to do all the investigative work to figure out who that man is related to,
Hmm.
where that person lived, and whether there are still relatives around and alive. That's like the additional steps after they even get a positive ID. When they get an identification, it's because they've got some DNA match that tells them, okay, now this John Doe is now, Bill Smith.
Yeah.
So they get the identification for this guy, Bill Smith, and they start to do tracing and tracking, and they can't find any connections to Bill Smith, family connections. So Leslie is tenacious is probably the best word to tie to Leslie. Leslie's very tenacious, and she decides to become certified as a genetic genealogist.
Mm.
Now, I'm not an expert in this area, of course. I'm FBI, but not in forensics. And so she decides to become a genetic genealogist, and she does all the work to become certified as a genetic genealogist, specifically so she can help further identify the people that they are trying to solve the murders of.
Yeah.
And the genetic genealogy is, and for the people, experts out there who are listening or watching and know what this is my very bad layman's description of what genetic genealogy is. If you don't have an exact DNA match, we do know that DNA works chronologically, both forward in time and backwards in time.
Hmm.
So if you go backwards, looking at genetic makeups of somebody, DNA makeups of somebody, if you go back a generation, you're going to get a wider spread of people, right? Your parents, then your grandparents, the next generation, there are 8 people. In the next generation, there are 16 people. In the next, or 32, whatever. It keeps exponentially increasing. So if you continue to go back in generations by taking 2 different people that have some pieces of that DNA and go back in generations, you can literally go back to find the person who must have been this dead person was their progeny.
Hmm.
So it's kind of a pyramid. You go backwards and backwards and backwards and backwards until the DNA makeup matches up with some people up above, and that those people up above have to be, this person has to be the offspring in generations down. Now,
Right.
that's a terrible description of it, and I'm sure your listeners probably have a much better description, or you do.
No, that was pretty good, Catherine.
But that's my version of it, to say, you go backwards in generations, and when you do that, you find the people, the commonalities. It's kind of like, when you go back in my history, I live here in the Virginia area. I was born in Detroit. I have family members in Michigan, family members in St. Louis. But if you go back in my genealogy, you'll find out that I have two connections to the Mayflower that came over,
Mhm.
because we are so we spread so quickly, right, when it comes to genetics. So, okay, long story set aside, they have this person, Bill Smith. They don't know what his real name is and who he is. So she works this genetic genealogy magic to identify this person by finding a family member, and they find a daughter.
Mm.
So they find a genetic connection to a woman who's still living in Michigan, and she appears to be in her 30s. So they find an address for her, basic, law enforcement gumshoe work. They find an address for her, and they go to her house. It's north of Detroit. And they knock on the door, and they say, hey, hi, here's who we are. And basically they're kind of saying, do you know where your dad is? Or do you know what happened to your dad? And she says, well, my dad is in the back room. He's very sick. Did you need him for something? I'm taking care of him. And they said, oh, we met your biological dad.
Mm.
And she said, well, my biological dad left my mom when she was 5 months pregnant with me.
Oh, wow.
So then they're kind of like, sit down,
Right.
let's have a discussion. And they tell her, not only is Bill Smith buried in a cemetery in Detroit, but Bill Smith was murdered. And Bill Smith, in fact, was the 11th victim, long unidentified, of a serial murderer 30
Mm.
some years ago in
Wow.
Michigan, in Detroit.
Wow.
So
Wow.
the actual subject was convicted in the serial murder cases, and went to jail.
Hmm.
And so in their conversations, she brings out her, high school paper that she's written, that she wrote kind of as her capstone paper. She says, my whole life, I have wondered where this man is and why he would have left my mom. And she had no idea why he would have left. And she had, and they have this conversation about how she has spent her whole life wondering, did he walk away?
Yeah.
Did he get hurt? Is he going to come back
Right.
tomorrow? Will he knock on the door? So she writes this whole thing. She's lived her whole life this way, and then moves on. And 30 years later, all of those questions that were the intense world of her entire childhood and bringing up are gone.
Wow.
She
And
knows his
there's
name. She knows what happened to him. She knows where he's buried, so she can go to his grave.
mhm.
And she knows why he never returned.
And hopefully there's 200 other stories like that. Not like that, but similar to it, where these people, these loved ones are able to get answers.
Yeah,
So,
there are
Catherine,
some great stories that are out there, and I think so many more to come. I want to tell more. I told some in the book, but I want to tell more.
yeah, well, that's great. Can you give us a little bit of your background in law enforcement?
Sure. I I'm actually a former prosecutor in Chicago. I was a Chicago prosecutor in the assistant state's attorney in the Chicago office. I left there after a number of years to go to the FBI, and I spent 20 years in the FBI working primarily national security matters, counter espionage stuff, counterintelligence, and terrorism. And after 9/11, of course, a lot of terrorism work. And I did it in in the Milwaukee office was my first office. You get assigned wherever they send you to go. I worked in Milwaukee first, and then I was transferred when I was promoted into Washington, D.C., and had an opportunity to work in Washington, D.C. at the Washington field office and then at FBI headquarters. But 15 years into my career, the Sandy Hook shooting happened. And when that occurred, I was working in FBI headquarters, and I was directed to go join a team at the White House to work only on school shootings and mass shootings.
Mm.
And in essence, that's I stood up the FBI's active shooter program on mass shootings for the last 5 years. I ran that program, and then that's all I've done since. I reached a mandatory age for the FBI. They retire people out at a mandatory age real quickly, younger than everybody else in society.
Mm.
And so when I hit that age, 57, then I went on to work on my own. And so all I do now is safety and security matters, counseling, consulting for, big companies and a lot of schools and a lot of churches, and just basically anything I can do to help them protect their employees and protect their personnel and keep people on the right path.
Um, I didn't give you a heads up that I was going to ask this, but you just saying that kind of triggered in my mind, you having worked mass shootings for so many years and covering this book in Michigan. There was a shooting last Sunday at an
Mm-hmm.
LDS church
Yeah.
in Michigan. When you see reports about that, or as you learn more about it, what do you think the public needs to know? I mean, how do you go in as an investigator and put the piece together to try to figure out what everyone wants to know about the motive or why this happened?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I don't mind answering that. I've answered it 1,000 times in different ways for different times through the years. Yeah, actually, I'm from Detroit, right? So it's, well, I guess I didn't say that in the beginning, but I am. I'm from Detroit. I was born
Okay.
there. And so that's one of the reasons why I love this story that Shannon, this connection to this situation that Shannon and Leslie are trying to deal with. Because, Leslie works there in the Detroit office. I visit home and I visit those guys.
Yeah.
So it's kind of fun. And right after that, the shooting, the incident that you're referring to is in a Latter Day Saints meeting house
Mhm.
up in just north of Detroit, not too far north of Detroit, and where an individual rammed a truck through the doorway and spread gasoline, shot people, lit the facility on fire, and then got into a shooting match with the police who were responding, and was shot and killed. There were individuals killed, two in the church who died in the church fire, and two who died at the scene. Two others who died, one at the scene and one at the hospital. So those are horrific incidents, and they kind of tie together all of our fears. I think that's the biggest thing is we all live right now in a time when people fear that their kids might not be safe at school. They might not be safe at a concert, or going to church or at the mall, and people might attack them because of their religious affiliation or because of their political leanings. And I think that's the temperature that we have in this country right now. Something that I think we all need to be cognizant of is that more than anything else, we can be the ones who change that. It may sound idealistic, Pollyannish, but it's not. I know from all the background, I have in my head pieces of more than 400 of these types of shootings. I've been at the scenes of them, many of them. I've interviewed all the people who've been involved in many of them. And there are some common threads to it that we know. This type of violence we call targeted violence. I just hear that term starting to be used in the news now, but we've been calling it targeted violence for years. And targeted is it's a planned violence as opposed to two kinds of violence: targeted violence, where somebody plans to go and kill a bunch of people, and violence that might occur because of circumstances, a bank robbery that goes wrong, a gang fight, a guy who gets into an argument with his fiance and one of them pulls out a gun or a knife. So that's not planned. It's more part of the criminal activity. But targeted violence is violence for violence sake. So, and we know that from Columbine High School to the Aurora Theater shooting, Virginia Tech shooting, to the shooting up in Maine not too long ago. I mean, there are many, many stories about businesses and restaurants where it's not a tussle because somebody's drunk. It's the person who comes to the scene with an intent to kill. So here's what I think, to answer that very long answer to your question. Here's what I think people need to know most importantly to help and save themselves and protect others. These are planned events. That means that the individual who's on this trajectory to commit this violent act plans for it and prepares for it after they get the idea, and then they attack. During that planning and preparation stages, during those stages of planning and preparing, all of their actions are visible if somebody's looking for them. 30 to 40% of the individuals who do this, and I would say 99% of them are men, because they just are. Men emote out, women emote in. More tendency to emote out versus in, but the people who do this, they plan, and that means they have to buy their guns, buy their ammunition, buy the gasoline they're going to use, buy the knives they're going to use. They buy different clothing. They all want to be cool looking in their pictures, and they post themselves with their black t-shirt on and their hat, their cool hat, and with their gun pointed online at the camera, post those pictures because they want their legacy to be somebody who's cool. So they plan in part and prepare by buying the things that they need, and then they draw out their plan. Oftentimes, almost every time, this plan is drawn out physically, drawn out on paper. We find them in school kids' desk drawers at home, and we find them in the trucks of cars after somebody is arrested or killed at the scene. They decide who they're going to kill or why they're going to kill, and they often write things that the news media generally calls manifestos, which I think is kind of a silly word for it because many times if somebody really has a multiple page manifesto, it's because they've copied somebody else's outrage.
Yeah.
But oftentimes you see people who have they have notebooks that they've kept for years. The Columbine killer, one of them kept notebooks for years, talking about how frustrated he was with the world. So all of this planning and preparation is done in front of other people. And if 30 to 40% of them intend to and do commit suicide, they also do all the things that we see people who commit suicide do. They do kind of end of life things. People who give their laptops away. The killer the killer in Las Vegas, the Las Vegas shooting, Live Nation concert, Las Vegas shooting, gave his girlfriend cash to buy a house in another country, and said, "Go, here's cash. Go buy a house in another country." Right. The shooter at the Pulse nightclub was intent on committing this type of act someplace, and he drove around that night several times. He told his wife, he was on the phone with his wife. She was trying to talk him down and tell him not to do it, but she knew ahead of time. It wasn't just that night. She knew ahead of time. He was saying, "I'm going to do this. I'm going to commit this violent act." So that's called leakage. So they do things that others do who might want to commit suicide, like give their possessions away, stop taking their medications, and say goodbye to people, leave notes for people, leave phone messages for people. "I'm sorry I did this, Dad." We see a lot of things like that.
Yeah.
So they do a number of planning and preparation. And your question, I think 3 hours ago when you asked it, was what can people do or see? What's the most important thing they need to know? They need to know that they are the ones who get this information. They are the ones who see the actions by the individuals. They see the behaviors of concern that maybe law enforcement will never see. In FBI research, one of the most frightening pieces of data that came out of our research when I was working at the FBI, in school shootings themselves, just school shootings, although businesses are similar, in school shootings, 92% of the shooters leak their intent to commit the act to a fellow student. 92%. So, it tells you, we know that in law enforcement is like the last one to know. So the people who can help us as a community, as a world, put to rest this kind of targeted violence are the people who are living and working around, going to school around the people who commit it.
Yeah. That's interesting because we do hear so often about right after it happens, did they leave a note? What were they posting on social media? Who did they tell when? And then we kind of move on. And then
Right.
another one happens. And I don't know, is there any sort of research that you've come upon as you've studied these, as you've worked in these for the past 5 years or longer with the FBI that, yeah, maybe we could do this one thing and it would reduce the number of these happening? Or is there one thing as society goes on and social media maybe explodes or we become more isolated that might be contributing to them? I know that's a really big question, and that's what everybody's trying to figure out.
Yeah, no, I think it's a fair question, though. I think it's a fair question, and 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 I think there are really a couple of good answers to that that I think are very accurate in terms of hopefulness, right? Motive is what everybody does want to know, but motive doesn't really matter in terms of us being able to prove something. But what are some of the things that we can do? We have to when we see something, we have to say something. To me, the biggest gap that exists is people see things, but they don't say them. They don't want to get involved. And when it comes to kids, why is it 92% for kids? Because kids believe that saying something to a teacher or principal is snitching.
Mm.
And children have to learn, and parents have to learn that snitching is getting somebody in trouble, but telling is getting somebody help. All these individuals need help. So they need help because they're not able to handle the world that they're in. And the behavioral analysis unit in the FBI and other experts in in the behavioral world have done and looked at how many people have done this and what has kind of motivated them. And they do fall into categories of political violence that turns from anger over political positions into I'm just going to act to create the change I want. And we know that doesn't work, but we see people fomenting the hate and action for hate about their political beliefs. That's something that we can all participate in, and that is an online thing. Everybody has to stop posting and reposting incredibly mean things. I hate to say it that way. We just have to be a kinder group. And I'll tell you, if you're listening or watching this and you have kids and you're reposting horrible memes or violence oriented memes about people who you don't like their political party or their religious beliefs, then I would say to you, is that what you tell your children when they go to school? Don't you tell them to get along with everybody on the playground? You tell them to just be nice and be kind and just tolerate other people. But we can't seem to do that as adults right now. And that's exacerbating the problem that we have. And I think there are many other situations. We know that there are mental health issues that aren't really being addressed. And so somebody has some issues and they turn into massive issues because they don't get the medical health care that they need.
Yeah.
Um, People who are in companies that our research tells us that people who shoot up businesses, many of them had problems at the workplace and were fired. In fact, our initial research shows that 23 out of 25 people in their workplace were employees, meaning your threat is inside. So knowing what your threat is and knowing that you have no idea what's going on in somebody's head. You don't know if their dad just died. They're at the grocery store, but their partner just, dumped them. Be kinder to people. It sounds simple, but that's what everything comes down to.
Yeah.
Is that we're a meaner society than we used to be, and we're paying for that with this kind of violence.
Right. It sounds simple, and it is simple to do, though. I mean, it's something all of us can do. I agree 100% with that. Have you ever had the chance to actually sit down with one of these shooters and talk to them face to face?
No, that's there are people who have, and that is actually something that I've chosen not to do.
Mm.
I talk to parents and victims, survivors, uh, you know, people who were, Frank DeAngelis, who was the high school principal at Columbine High School, wrote the foreword for my first book. He and I know each other well, and I don't want to talk to those people. There are people who do. I have a podcast called Stop the Killing, where we talk about these kinds of incidents, but we don't talk about the killers themselves. We talk about what their traits are. They'll say, this is what this person did, but we don't use their names and talk about them individually. And I've had killers reach out to me and say, I think I'd love to come on your podcast and talk to, what took me to this. But that's a choice that I make.
Mm.
That I think that would be harder for me knowing that I've worked so much in investigations and on the victim side. And I don't want to give them that limelight because many shooters, part of their, especially now, part of their glory is comes in being in their being
Famous.
continuing as and famous as a shooter.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
don't I don't want to give anybody that. They
Yeah.
want to be famous, and they say it, they want to be somebody. Everybody in generations right now, they're struggling with what is their significance, and they come from a generation of baby boomers or Gen Xers or whatever. My family is the generation that came from World War II veterans. How do you meet those standards? What did your dad do? Oh, he was a fighter pilot over Normandy. So I mean, those are high standards, and I think that the generations below struggle with where they fit in and how they fit in. And when you're constantly struggling for that, I think that's part of what this is one of the byproducts.
Right. Catherine, when I was researching before our interview, I saw that you are the founder or the co-founder of a victims advocacy group. Do I have that right? And can you tell me a little bit about that?
I'm not. I'm the co-founder of the Bureau Consortium,
Oh, okay,
and
yes. And that
um,
deals with
and
victims, right?
and it does, right? It does, and
Yes.
I think that's another reason why the Bureau Consortium is. But you're so close, right? As they say, the consortium is a group of retired FBI law enforcement and behavioral experts, primarily behavioral experts, people who we work together to think of the ways that we can create and provide to businesses and schools and colleges and whatever best practices for not just preventing a shooting, as horrific as we might see, but also how do you respond to it when it's there, and how do you recover from it? Because I think the recovery from it is equally important. And everybody has to recover in their own way. I mentioned Frank DeAngelis from Columbine. One of the ways that Frank dealt with his frustration in dealing with his reality after Columbine is that he determined that he was going to stay at the school, and
Mm,
he remained principal of the school at Columbine until every student who was in school at the time in that town was finished with school.
wow.
So kindergarten on up, he remained with the school system because he wanted to see through and carry the way his thoughts were through to every single student who
Yeah.
went to the school from that time. And so everybody deals with things differently. And everybody deals with things differently, sorry. And we want to make sure that we let them, do that. And the hard part is that um, you don't really know what you have until you have it, right?
Mhm.
And this group, the Bureau Consortium, allows us to have people who are experts in uh, tactical response. That's, experts in prevention, our behavioral experts in tactical response, target hardening, we call it also. I do a lot of counseling on what can you do to keep your building safer, to make yourself less vulnerable. And then also experts on how do we recover victim services and survivors. I would say when I was in the FBI, this is going to sound braggadocious, and it is, but I don't mean it quite this way.
Mhm.
I have 2 Attorney General awards that I got while I was in the FBI. One earlier in my career, one later in my career. Both of them, as it turned out, had to do with something where the Attorney General's office in the weighing of the awards felt that what we provided, what we developed, was so beneficial to victims. And to me, that means a lot,
Yeah.
because isn't that why you're in the business in law enforcement, is to protect and serve? Protect. It's the first word, right? Protect and serve. So we want to take care of the people who are impacted by criminal activity. And I thought that was really important because as a law enforcement officer, when you're running around with a gun and a badge, you don't always get people to see and recognize that that's what you're working on.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Catherine, thank you very much. Tell people again the name of the book, where they can get it, and why they should buy it.
Yes. Oh, thank you for asking. Well, first of all, my name is Catherine Schweit, and that's my website, catherineschweit.com. So if you can figure out how to spell my name, you're good to go. Schweid, Catherine with a K, the old fashioned way, catherineschweit.com. And all of the books are identified on there, as is my podcast. So in the Bureau Consortium, you can track us all down there. But if you want to buy the books, if the book is my this book is my newest book is called Women Who Talk to the Dead. It's over my shoulder. I call it the yellow book. Women Who Talk to the Dead, and it's available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook. All of my books are available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook. The other two, the one that's just before this one is called A Simple Guide to the Second Amendment, because actually I teach a class for DePaul University College of Law. I teach a class on the Second Amendment. And so I wrote a book about that to the benefit. I couldn't find a book that was politically neutral on the Second Amendment, so I wrote one. And then the book prior to that is Stop the Killing. And that book is also the name of my podcast, Stop the Killing. And there we explore just what you were asking me about. What are the best prevention methods? And in a very kind of uplifting way, I would say, and kind of a fun way, because my co-podcaster is from London. And so if it's worth it just to enjoy her accent. But I think you also hear a lot of stories of hopefulness. And that podcast series has been going for a long time. We have a couple hundred episodes, and we're just about to launch season 6. And the people who have been on it are the ones who are impacted, the victims, the survivors, the people who made decisions and couldn't make decisions, and how it's impacted them. So it's pretty good. It's a pretty good listen to.
Wonderful.
So thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Oh, sure. Thank you. And thank you for your service to our country. And what a fascinating career, and look forward to reading the entire book, Women Who Talk to the Dead. You can pick it up. And Catherine, I might call on you again, for your expertise down the line.
No problem. Anytime.
Thank you.
Then I'll ask you what you think of the book. I think you'll be surprised at how good it is.
Yeah.
Because the reviews have been great.
That's great.
Midwest Book Review, which is like a great, and they hardly review any books, said it was unreservedly recommended. I was like, what?
Well, hey, we'll recommend it here then. Thank you, Catherine.
Thanks. You're the best. Thank you. Take care. Have a good day.
You too. My thanks again to Catherine Schweit. The name of the book, Women Who Talk to the Dead. And there's so many fascinating stories in there that I think you'll like it. You can order that book through her website, and we'll put a link down in the description of this video that you can click on to order those books. And if you want to go do your own research on some of these, the best place to do it, one of the best places I could say, newspapers.com. They sponsor Courtroom Insider. They're with us every night here, and they have a fascinating look at some of these cases, not only these unsolved cases, but all sorts of unsolved cases. You can go on there and type in unsolved murder case or unsolved homicide, and they can help you find what you're looking for. In addition to that, they have, your family history stuff that you can look up, fun stuff that you can look up, anything that's in the news now, you can, type in and see what comes up. Over 1 billion pages on newspapers.com. Check them out, 7-day free trial, and thank them. We thank them here at East Idaho News and Courtroom Insider for sponsoring us. And I thank you for watching tonight. We're going to be back this week, either tomorrow, Wednesday, or Thursday. I have a really compelling discussion with a man who lost his daughter in a horrible car crash. And it happened 10 years ago. And he is now sharing his journey through mental health, through what he's learned. And he's a counselor. He's actually a therapist. We covered this when it happened. It was 2 days before Thanksgiving when his family went to have lunch with him at Five Guys. And on the way home, a tire blew on a semi, crossed the median, and slammed into the car carrying his wife and children. 6-year-old died instantly. Wife nearly lost her foot. And he gets quite candid in his first interview about this. I've been trying to interview him for a while, for a few years now, and he finally wants to do it, and he wants to do it in hopes of reaching parents of other children parents who have had children who have passed away in his similar circumstances. So that will be probably tomorrow. I got to figure out my time here, but I'm hoping we can post that tomorrow night, Wednesday night, here on Courtroom Insider. If not, we'll have it Thursday. But I'll keep you posted. You can follow me here. This is where I post my updates on East Idaho News on my Facebook page. Also on Instagram is where I'm at. I'm on X, and I'm also on YouTube, which we'd love if you would subscribe because, that's how we reach more people and that's how we share more stories and that's how we can all kind of come together and get the word out. So if you haven't subscribed, please do so. Would love to hear from you. Also on Meet and the Eatons, that's where you can find me. That's our family channel where we post goofy little silly stuff and serious stuff too. Thank you for watching. No matter if you're goofy or serious, love you anyways. And we'll be back tomorrow night with another edition of Courtroom Insider. Have a good night.